Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have the truth about China's social credit system and FICO, posted by Jacob Anders, and that's a cross post from the socialism subreddit. And yeah, it looks like a video, I guess, on that. And yeah, since it's from the socialism subreddit, it's probably going to be more in defense of China's social credit system. Personally, I don't think we should have government-run social credit systems. But, ultimately, if a government has the ability to justify enforcing a credit system, just like for everything else, the government can enforce whatever it wants to, and often there's nothing you can do about it. Personally, I think it's only a matter of time before the credit system, social credit system, makes its way stateside, because, it seems like they're trying to phase out paper money and make money entirely digital, and I think that's how that's really what was in China. In China, they don't really use physical money, and increasingly in the U.S., we don't really use physical money. And when money's all digital, you can easily implement a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, and it's also a lot easier to control people's income and what they can and can't spend it on, since it's in the cloud. It's not physical money, and I think that's important to remember as well. So that's why I think it's very important to keep using physical money for as long as they let you use it, because when everyone's using digital money, they'll try and implement this social credit system, and hopefully it won't be as bad as the People's Republic of China, but I guess we'll have to wait and see on that front. Next we have Fed subpoena Hassan Piker, Medea Benjamin over Cuba trips, from FoxNews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Hassan Piker or Medea Benjamin, but if they want to go to Cuba, I think they should be able to, and I don't think the feds should be subpoenaing them over it. But ultimately, the feds can subpoena or do any other legalese bullshit to people and that they feel like, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it, since they're in the position of authority and you aren't. Next we have, in Alabama, McDonald's and other businesses can rent prisoners, posted by Jacob Anders, and that's a picture from, looks like an Alabama McDonald's with one of the workers it's chained to the counter, it looks like. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, if the government does want to let businesses rent prisoners, they should be able to do so. But ultimately, I think it's kind of unethical, but ultimately, sometimes people are going to justify doing unethical things, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's a private business. If it wants to hire a prisoner because the government allows them to rent prisoners, ultimately, they should be able to justify that. But I personally do think it is kind of unethical, but, sometimes people do justify unethical things, and yeah, that's my thoughts there. Next we have, a SWAT team destroyed an innocent woman's home. She's been waiting 6 years for justice, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but, ultimately, just like with every other government agency, if a SWAT team ever wants to break into and destroy your home for whatever reason whatsoever, ultimately, there's really nothing you can do about it, since, the states control the courts and legal system as well, and people, and the states, just like many other people, aren't going to want to hold themselves accountable. And yeah, that's ultimately how life is sometimes. Sometimes bad things are going to happen to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Next we have, Rand Paul has increased the frequency of saying both parties are to blame for this over the last year. What are the chances he pulls a Gary Johnson, goes libertarian, and teams up with Massey for a presidential run, posted by Per Hizzle, and they said it would undoubtedly be the most supported libertarian campaign of all time. I know it is a different situation because Rand is a senator and there's no term limits right now. I know this is just some libertarian wondering, but Rand did a campaign with Massey for Massey against the Trump IPAC candidates. These chances getting some heat coming his way from the same way that Massey got. What would you put odds on think it ever happening? And what percentage of the popular vote do you think they could snag? I just think just getting 20% of the popular vote would be a huge one for America, and the Libertarian Party would likely change American politics for better overnight. And I would agree with that. Personally, I don't know if Rand Paul and Thomas Massey can be on the same ticket, since they're both from the same state, because they don't allow that people to do that. But I guess one of them can change their residency if worse came to worse. They did want to be on the same ticket. Reddit's not into Rand Paul as much, since Trump hasn't gone after him as much and kicked him out of office yet. I definitely do think Rand Paul's smart enough to realize that you can't really go after Trump too much. He'll have you thrown out of office like you did with Thomas Massey. But yeah, I definitely would support that ticket if it ever did happen. But hopefully it does. But I'm not too keen at this point. Even if it did happen, they'd still be running as a third party, which, is an uphill battle. A third party hasn't won like 5% of the vote since the Reform Party in 1996, and it hasn't carried a state since the American Independent Party in 1968. So, it's definitely an uphill battle, regardless of how hyped the candidate is, and I think that's important to remember as well. Hopefully, one day the Uniparty will fall, but I don't know how soon that's going to be. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Kana on Massey's loss to Galrain, sadness, disappointment from thehill.com, posted by Jolly Porcupine. And yeah, I'm sad about Massey's loss too, but it just really goes to show you how much a farce electoral politics all is. Ultimately, those with the more money and resources can buy whatever Congress seats they want to, and oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it. That's very much how life is. It's a battle of resources. Who has the resources to get away with what, and yeah, it's who has the economic and social capital to get away with what, I should say. And oftentimes, if you ever go against the grain, you're going to lose economic and social capital like Massey did, and sometimes, that's just how life works. Next, we have Thomas Massey refused to rule out presidential run in 2028 after losing primary, from independent.co.uk, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, I'd like to see a Thomas Massey presidential run. I don't know how realistic it is, especially since people don't want to vote split and just hand the presidency back to the Democrats. But it's just ultimately I don't think it really matters, because the Republicans and the Democrats are two sides of the same stick coin. They agree on 95% of shit while using cultural war wedge issues like LGBTQ and abortion to justify, keeping everyone at each other's throats, I would say. So, ultimately, I don't think it really matters if the vote is split between Thomas Massey and whoever the Republican Party would nominate. But, ultimately, if voting mattered in the first place, they probably wouldn't let us do it at all. So, I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Massey, unlike those who threw him out, doesn't protect Epstein clients, posted by Jai Porcupine, and that's a Twitter thread. And Thomas Massey said, "There's a quiet war for the future of our country. Let's not misdirect our precious resources. I do not believe I lost due to fraudulent votes, mail-in ballots, hacking, or mistabulated results. I respect those who want to make sure, but I won't be requesting a recount." And then Patriot Lady replied, "You lost because you voted against your constituents." And Thomas Massey replied to that, "Epstein's friends are not my constituents." And the OP added, "Why does MAGA work so hard to protect the Epstein clients?" And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Epstein, but ultimately, Epstein, just like all the other bad faith actors involved in blackmailing the government and controlling them, he's more par for the course, and I think they let it on. And yeah, personally, if you ever stand up too much against the Epstein class, they'll have you thrown out like Thomas Massey, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it, which is why, the government is inherently going to be corrupt and self-serving, and that's just like how everyone else is. People are going to be self-serving first and foremost, and the government is as well, and I think that's important to remember. All governments are going to be self-serving. Thomas Massey's probably one of the few exceptions on that front, and that's why, they'll have him thrown out, and when it happens, there's sadly nothing you can do. Next, we have Why is Libertarianism Completely Dead in the UK, posted by Vorkorvis, and they said, "I've been trying to discuss libertarian principles, especially absolute freedom of speech, free market statism with British people both online and real life, and the pushback I get is just crazy. The funniest thing is Western culture actually taught me all of this. Now I feel like a student who came back to his former teachers to talk about their own lessons, and they're completely refusing to listen to me, calling it Russian nihilism or trauma. It feels like the UK has a very deep culture of statism nowadays, and it doesn't matter if the person is left or right wing. When you bring up government overreach, like people getting in trouble with the police for offensive tweets or the new Online Safety Act, the average British guy doesn't get angry. Instead, they defend the government, say it was to prevent hate and maintain public order. Even Conservative Party acts like a social democratic party by U.S. standards. They can constantly defend government intervention. Feels like political center, especially entirely drifted left. For those who live in the UK or know their policies or know their politics, what do you think the country of John Locke and Adam Smith became so hostile to modern libertarian ideas? Is there any future of the libertarian movement here, or is it completely lost case? Would love to hear your thoughts." And yeah, personally, I think Europe's kind of a lost cause, I would say. ultimately they'll justify whatever statism they feel like as long as it's progressive. It's like they'll say, oh, we support free speech but not hate speech and misinformation. Well, in reality, all everything they label as hate speech, misinformation is going to be inherently free speech, because ultimately those in positions of authority can label any speech they don't like as hate speech, misinformation, and there's nothing you can do about it. But yeah, ultimately, if you want to try fighting for libertarianism over in Europe, I do think you should do that, especially if you're over in Europe currently. But I do think it's kind of a lost cause currently. But a lot of lost causes over the years, they sometimes, you never know exactly what's going to happen. Maybe something that's a lost cause will eventually prevail, and I think that's important to remember as well. Ultimately, I think each person should try and fight and to preserve liberty as much as possible in whatever country they're in, and that includes the UK. But I don't know how realistic it is when people are willing to or love to justify statism as long as it fits with their agenda. And that's my thoughts there. Next, we have the Republic has survived 250 years, nor now we will decide whether it continues, from thehill.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I would say the Republic died arguably sometime between 1860 and 1945. Since then we've really been more of an empire than a republic. And I think that's important to realize as well. Reddit, they always market Trump like he's the worst thing ever. Their politics is pretty much all orange man bad. But in reality, Trump is much more par for the course than people like to think, I would say. Outside of all his baiting online, he's pretty much just your average U.S. president. And I think that's important to remember. The Republic's been dead for decades, if not well over a century at this point. And I think at this point, we just gotta burn it all down and start over. Maybe let the states go their own ways for a bit. And yeah, personally, I think it's time to just start over and just let the states go their own ways. Maybe in the future they can reunite if they feel like it. But I definitely do think we need the states to go their own ways for a bit, because the federal government is just increasingly bloated and run by the deep state military industrial complex, satanic cabal, lizard people, whatever you want to call them. Next, we have Massey running for office in 2028, posted by DamperBeat746, and that's a screenshot of a tweet from Thomas Massey, and he tweeted, "I file with the FCC for 2028 House race. This allows me to raise funds to continue my political operations, supporting my position as a current office holder and a potential candidate for federal office. I have made a final decision about which office to seek if I run." And yeah, personally, I think that's a good idea. I do think Massey can definitely maybe find some support for maybe the presidency, maybe the Senate, maybe the House. I don't know, but I definitely do think he should be continuing to be politically active, because he's definitely one of the best people the liberty movement has currently. Next, we have the most valuable act of a human being is the capacity to say no by its own will. And that looks like a picture posted by Amugus Devilman, and that looks like a picture of a bunch of students doing a Muslim prayer, and I think England, they said, and they put in a comment, a Church of England primary school in Lincolnshire has become embroiled in controversy following claims that pupils were asked to take part in a Muslim prayer. Deputy leader of Reform Ukraine, Richard Tice, said he was contracted by a parent in his constituency who alleged that pupils were coerced, manipulated, and pressured in participating despite none of the children in class being Muslim. According to the father, his 7-year-old daughter's class was shown a video during a religious education lesson depicting people kneeling on prayer mats facing Mecca and reciting a prayer to Allah, after which the children were encouraged to try it themselves. And yeah, personally, I think if the school wanted to do that, I think that's fine. But I definitely do think they should have been open about it. I think it's interesting. Reddit's probably going to defend this, saying, "Oh, if they should be able to do whatever they want at schools." But if it was a Christian prayer, Reddit would be going absolutely ballistic and insane over it. And I think that's important to remember as well. It's like whenever you say to criticize Islam on Reddit, they'll say no. So you say, or I should say, you criticize Christianity on Reddit, say, yes, Christianity is bad, but you ever criticize Islam on Reddit, they'll say, well, all religion is bad. I think that's important to remember as well. The progressives will always defend Islam since it's mostly a religion of brown people, and that's very much what progressivism is, worshiping people because of their minority status, whether it be racial minority, sexual orientation minority, disability minority, etc., and that's why you can't take very much seriously seriously. They'll just justify anything as long as it benefits a minority, and I think that's important to remember as well. So yeah, personally, I do think it looks like this one kid in the picture isn't doing the Muslim prayer, and I think that's good. If he didn't want to do the prayer, I think they should be able to. It should very much be, if kids want to do the prayer, they should have been able to. If they didn't want to do the prayer, they should have been able to. But I definitely do think the school should have been open about it to the parents, because I don't think a lot of the parents would have liked the kids doing a Muslim prayer, and I think that's important to remember as well. Next we have Who Planted Whom When, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-posted by the Murder by Word subreddit, and that looks like a tweet from Donald Trump. The Biden FBI placed 274 agents into the crowd on January 6th. If this is so, which it is, a lot of very good people will be owed big apologies. What scam? Do something, President DJT. And this one Twitter person who scared the tweet truth of the screenshot, Mayra, said, how could President Biden have planned 274 agents at the January 6th night instruction when Trump was president then? And I think that's a good question to ask. Personally, I don't think Biden or Trump is really in control of the FBI. I think that the FBI is inherently one of the deep state, military-industrial complex, alphabet agencies, satanic cabal, lizard people control, whatever you want to call it. I think that's important to remember as well. A lot of conservatives say, we can reform the FBI, but in reality, I think the libertarians have the right position. The FBI needs to be dealt away with, same with pretty much all the other alphabet agencies. Next we have, can you rely on the private sector to invest in exploring the potential benefits of repurposing off-patent drugs for diseases like cancer, posted by Nick Reach, 3239. And yeah, personally I think you can. Ultimately, the private sector is going to act in its own self-interest, but if they want to justify letting off-patent drugs get repurposed for things like cancer, I think they'll probably be able to, because that might make them look good if their products are used to cure cancer, because ultimately that's what all economics is about, looking as good as possible. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. But yeah, they might try and repatent those drugs if they do end up curing diseases like cancer, because they do have to make a profit first and foremost, and that's important to remember as well. Next, we have AI is about to take more jobs, posted by Jacob Anders, and that's a cross post from the Yang for President HQ subreddit. Is it over for the West? And it says, Andrew Yang just left an AI conference. He wasn't prepared for what he saw. And yeah, personally, I think AI is kind of overhyped. But, ultimately, I think libertarian position on AI is the same as his position on guns, abortions, drugs, etc., etc. AI is a tool. It can be misused and used for bad things. But, ultimately, it shouldn't be regulated. It should be up to each person how much they want to use it. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. If you want to use AI, you should be able to. If you don't want to use AI, you should be able to. It's ultimately very much an individual decision. Whatever you want to justify doing with AI, you should be able to do. But ultimately, it might not be good. You shouldn't be doing revenge porn of people. But you should definitely be able to do whatever you feel like with it, and it shouldn't be regulated, because regulations are just government control. And for people to truly be free, we need as little government control as possible. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.